Before starting with the session, allow me to introduce myself and the work that my team is responsible in the UNFCCC Secretariat. I am Yolanda Velasco, the Manager of Climate Finance Subdivision within the Secretariat, and our team is responsible in supporting the parties to the Convention in the negotiations on climate finance-related matters. Before starting with the session, allow me to introduce myself and the work that my team is responsible in the UNFCCC Secretariat. I am Yolanda Velasco, the Manager of Climate Finance Subdivision within the Secretariat, and our team is responsible in supporting the parties to the Convention in the negotiations on climate finance-related matters. This session will attempt to address the question of what are the common barriers and enablers in accessing climate finance, particularly adaptation finance. We will also look into case studies and experiences of countries in accessing climate finance, such as through establishing or enhancing institutional arrangements, providing capacity building opportunities, and raising awareness of domestic stakeholders on financing availability to support climate actions. At each topic, I will be providing simple checklists or food for thoughts, just to remind you of certain actions needed to improve access, something that you may already be aware of, or something that needs to be pursued by you and your agency. Feel free to expand, revise these checklists as appropriate. It is important to note that this session builds on the previous sessions in terms of having the right ingredients to be able to effectively mobilize on climate finance access. Also, another important caveat is that this session only provides an overview and not a comprehensive tool in accessing finance. And finally, I've added slides on possible online sources that you may check. These are tools, methodologies, processes, information that are relevant in the process of project development and implementation. Now going into the barriers of accessing climate finance, particularly adaptation finance. First thing that comes into mind when we speak about barriers, and these are barriers that most countries have identified in the development of project proposals. So first, the lack of clarity in and understanding in defining development and adaptation finance. And often these lead to the difficulty in the justification of the project and also in identifying the different activities and components of the project that is being envisioned. In particular, the question is there a goal and vision on adaptation at the country level? And in most cases, these goals and vision are enshrined in national adaptation plans, the NDCs, or national communications. For the national adaptation plans, or NAPs, in Southeast Asia, currently only 3 countries have accessed the GCF support in the development of NAPs. all developing countries may be able to access up to $3 million to support the development of NAPs, which are, by the way, mandated by the Conference of the Parties, serving as the meeting of parties to the Paris Agreement, or what we call the CMA. And in the case of NDCs, all Southeast Asian countries have included in their NDCs adaptation priorities, goals, and their vision on adaptation. So you may actually use that as a basis for the justification of any adaptation project that you may develop for the country. And finally, on national communications, which is an obligation to the convention, all parties to the convention submit regularly their national communications and BURs. And in the national communication, there is specific chapter in there on vulnerability and adaptation assessments, which provides a more detailed policy and technical information with regards to adaptation priorities of the country. It is also important to note the cross-cutting nature of adaptation, and thus any actions being undertaken in the context of adaptation will also look into other processes such as sustainable development goals, the other conventions like biodiversity, and others. It is also important to note that that adaptation and even mitigation also have sectoral and thematic linkages and co-benefits. So it is important to understand this from the context of sources of finance, not so much about the project, because obviously any adaptation or mitigation project would have development co-benefits. The distinction between development and climate, particularly for the adaptation project, becomes critical in terms of determining the full cost and incremental cost of the project. As the climate funds, in particular, only fund the climate component of the project. And this is where other sources of finance or blended finance would come in handy in terms of supporting the non-climate component of the project. For example, the development objective of the project. This is where also you looked into the co-financing sources for the project. Another barrier to the development of project proposals is the lack of technical data. The information on climate at the national level is evolving with new research and new findings, and also new policies being developed by the governments. So component of this technical data that is required in project development are the baseline information, setting up indicators for climate. It is important to understand what is the business as usual scenario and what is the climate scenario. Again, this goes back into the discussion of the additionality of climate with regards to development. It is important also that you have information in terms of the measurements, terms of again baseline and what are the projected impacts of climate, and also the projected impacts of the project, be it at the local or national level. It is also important to ensure accuracy of the data that is being provided. And that's why part of the issue that needs to be looked at when we speak about accuracy of the data would be the tools, methodologies, and processes that the project used in terms of the measurement, the baselines, and the indicators. Local context is very important, as in particular for adaptation project, as the impacts of the measures being planned or envisioned would be measured in terms of the benefits at the local level. The design of the project would also depend on the context and the local condition, and that's why it's important to have a thorough analysis of the local context. Information about the coverage of the project is also key. It's important to have consistency over time, both processes, methodologies, and the tools, the scope of this and the project, and the granularity of information that is being generated out of these technical studies. It is important also to note that part of the barrier in the technical data is the varying approaches, methodologies, and assumptions used at the project level or even at the national level. What is important here is that the information is transparent, at this point. It is also important for the project to annotate what are the limitations, constraints encountered by the project in terms of the data. Earlier, I mentioned about the full and incremental cost of the project. This is one area where project developers also identified as a challenge. So, for example, comparing the proposed intervention to the business as usual, as I mentioned earlier, the climate funds usually support the climate component. So that would be what would be the intervention that this project will undertake. And it is important to cost that intervention, and also to assess that without that intervention, what would be the business as usual scenario and the impacts that will take place in the absence of the intervention or in the absence of the project. And this is where an analysis of full cost and incremental cost for adaptation becomes critical. In the scenario where it is not possible to calculate the costs, then the question is, how do you qualitatively assess the impacts of the interventions? And what are the approaches and processes in doing so? So it is important that understanding the additionality of the intervention and qualifying them would be one of the key aspects in terms of determining the cost. Again, it is always a challenge in determining the incremental cost, especially if data is not available and data cannot be quantified. Like, for example, impacts with regards to lives, impacts with regards to culture, impacts to society that are non-economic in nature. So these are some of the impacts that one can just qualify in terms instead of quantifying them for reasons that these are elements that cannot be quantified. And finally, in terms of the barrier of determining the incremental cost, is that there are no standardized sectoral guidelines and policies for doing so. There are experiences from other projects and from other countries. The standardization of these guidelines and policies happen at the fund level. So depending on what are the the policies and requirements of the fund in terms of calculating the cost. And that's why it's important to have in mind the financial institution that you intend to put forward your proposal, so that then you can tailor fit the design of your project on the requirements of the financial institution. The other common barriers to accessing climate finance are the institutional limitations, be it at the local or national level. So issues around disparate decision-making processes, either at the agency level or at the national level, or even at the local level. It is important to understand the decision-making processes and the institutional arrangements. The other issue also with regards to constraints in institutional framework is the lack of accountability for both the regulation and compliance of those regulations. The accountability for the regulation and its implementation also depends on the understanding of the rules and regulations. There are national and local policies that are in place. They may not be directly linked to climate, but they are relevant to any climate related projects, such as regulations, for example, on water, on energy, on agriculture, and others. So it is important to understand these regulations and the compliance requirements. And that's why in project development, they require for environmental impact assessments to ensure that projects are in compliance with the regulations, environmental regulations. In the case of the financial institutions, they look into social and environmental safeguards of the project to ensure that the project is in compliance with social and environmental standards set by the government. Also, there is a limited awareness among various decision makers with regards to prioritization of adaptation projects and or policies. For policy making at the local and national level, climate is still in its nascent stage, and that's why for policies and regulations to be set in place or established, it is also important to raise the awareness of policymakers on this. What are the benefits of having policies in place, and what policies can be developed to support project development and implementation of climate actions. The other barrier to accessing climate finance is the evaluation of risks and benefits. This becomes important in terms of investments and securing investments for the project. The evaluation and understanding the risks and benefits of the project. So, for example, there are challenges in standardizing the data and information with regards to quantifying benefits or of adaptation projects or the cost of inaction. In some cases, the risks are very localized. That one risk being identified in a particular community or locality may not be the same risk that other communities or localities also consider. So in some instances, these risks, be it social, political, or physical or environmental risks, need to be understood thoroughly in developing the project. It is also important to understand what are the long-term and the short-term benefits and gains of the project. Again, this goes back to the discussion on the link to the discussion on the incremental and full costs of the project. As mentioned earlier, this can be either quantitative or qualitative. And finally, quantifying benefits across sectors, for example, infrastructure, social protection, and also what are the co-benefits of the project. In some instances, you would have adaptation project with mitigation co-benefit, or vice versa. The co-benefits are important in terms of the added value of the project with regards to the other sectors or with regards to the other thematic areas that are being considered and part of the scope of the project. And finally, what most project developers identify as common barriers to accessing climate finance is the challenge of navigating through the various funding windows and of the financial institutions. So experiences such as complex, detailed, time-consuming processes, the going back and forth with the financial institutions in terms of getting, for example, project concept approved, and then from the project concept into project proposal, processes at the national level that would that would require, for example, a no objection letter coming from the national designated authority in the case of the GCF, or the focal point of the GEF, and also the need, for example, for consultations among various stakeholders, especially the ones that will be impacted by the project. Understanding the complexity in terms of project requirements and project policies, which are, by the way, not standardized across different funding institutions. And as a matter of fact, this is one of the area that parties to the convention are actually proposing that the different funding institutions standardize their processes. Also, the eligibility criteria differs from one fund to the other, depending on the mandate of the institution. So eligibility criteria in terms of who can access the project. So it is important that, for example, for the country or for the project developer to check on which multilateral environmental agreements the country has signed. Since these funds are, for example, the GCF, GEF, Adaptation Fund, these funds are created specifically to implement the objectives of those of the convention and the treaties. Then eligibility in terms of access to these funds depend on whether the country has signed the convention and the different treaties. So for Adaptation Fund, only countries that are that have ratified the Kyoto Protocol can access the Adaptation Fund. In the case of the GCF, since it's serving both the convention and the Paris Agreement, at least the country that will access a fund to the GCF will have to have either signed and ratify the convention and or the Paris or the Paris Agreement. So eligibility also in terms of the types of projects. So obviously Adaptation Fund is only funding adaptation. GCF is funding both adaptation mitigation. The GEF is only the GEF is only funding mitigation, but there are other conventions that the GEF is supporting that countries have access, and they served as co-benefits to the mitigation projects that GEF is supporting. But LDCF and SECF are able to fund adaptation projects. So understanding the mandate of these institutions are important. And finally, language barriers. In terms of the official languages that that are being used by the countries, and also languages, official languages used by the financial institutions. So increasingly, institutions are making available and availing of translation services for countries to be able to submit their project proposals in their own official national languages. And these are official languages of the United Nations. So those are, again, barriers that most project developers and countries have. In addition, you would have enhancing technical capacity in terms of looking at what are the enablers to accessing climate finance. So earlier we've discussed about barriers, and these are some of the points in terms of how do you enable institutions, agencies to be able to access climate finance. First is the technical capacity, and we mentioned earlier that the lack of technical capacity is a barrier in accessing finance. So enhancing this capacity by first understanding what's the finance landscape at the country level in terms of flows, both to mitigation, adaptation. So how much the country has received from all sources, public finance, private finance, both domestic and international. So it's important to understand the different sources of financing and how much has flowed over the years. And if information is available, the projected financing that will be made available to the country. In some funding financial institutions like the JEF, they have country allocations. So a country, as a matter of fact, knows how much resources are available for their climate projects. In other funding institutions and windows, they have they set a cap in terms of how much a country will be able to access. For example, Adaptation Fund up to 10 million, or in the case of the GCF, as I mentioned earlier, depending on the type of project, for readiness project, there is a cap. For preparing national adaptation plan is up to $3 million. So understanding these flows and even the types of instruments that the country has availed of in the past would be important. And it is also important to understand the nature of the project proposal, particularly in terms of what are the innovative features of the project, and its impact in terms of transforming, for example, local or national conditions to address climate change. And GCF in particular assess the projects in terms of these criteria, innovation and transformational impact of the project. It is also important to enhance the institutional frameworks and the capacities. So, for example, engaging the different agencies in both the development of the project and in the implementation of the project. Engaging different stakeholders, civil society and other sectors are also key in the development of the project and implementation. Strengthening resources towards long-term capacity for measurement, reporting, and evaluation of the project is important, and as a matter of fact required in all of the projects. The third point is demonstrating the economic case, so making the case for return of investments for projects that have this component, and at the same time understanding the risks and how can they be mitigated, and what type of financial instruments can be used to lower the risks, and also what are measures that are being set in place to manage the risks. So again, having a strong economic case would be important for the project. And it is also important to strengthen policies whenever and wherever they are wanting. Earlier we talked about assessing the different policies relevant to the project, and in this regard, it is important to not just identify but also ensure coordination of policies, strategies, plans, and incentives. And that's why from the very start it is important to link the project to the overall goals and visions vision of the country with regards to climate and in particular to adaptation. And then looking at the long-term policy signals coming from the government in terms of the priorities and in terms of the needs of the country. And as I mentioned earlier, these are, at least for Southeast Asia, these are enshrined in the initial nationally determined contributions submitted by the ASEAN countries to the convention. Now, to conclude on this session, as I mentioned, I came up with some checklists and also as a way to summarize this session. So first, does your country have a national adaptation plan aimed at identifying medium, long-term adaptation needs and developing and implementing strategies and programs to address those needs. This is, as I mentioned, this is the foundation of any project, having an understanding of the big picture, understanding the goals, understanding the vision of the country on mitigation, and in the case of on adaptation, and in the case of mitigation, what are the projected plans of the government in terms of GHG mitigation and reduction. So the next one is what are the national policy frameworks that are relevant to the project you are developing, be it local and national policies. And it's important also to understand the nuances and implementing regulations of these policies. The third point is that what are the development linkages and co-benefits of the project being designed? That is, as I mentioned, understanding the development and climate objectives and the co-benefits of the project is important in terms of identifying later on the incremental and full cost of the project. Next one is, have you done an inventory of sources of technical information, such as the vulnerability and adaptation assessments in the context of national communications, and other adaptation assessments conducted by regional institutions, multilateral and bilateral funding agencies. By now, different institutions, be it national agencies, regional and international institutions, and other research institutions, have generated data that would be useful in the project development. And linked to this is the question of, is there a database on adaptation or mitigation information in the country? Sometimes when a project developer would say that there is a lack of technical data, it's a question of whether is there really a lack of data or just an understanding of where this data lies and the institutions that have generated this information. And that's why it's important to have a national database of information, climate information that have been generated for the country, which would be useful in project development. What are the tools, methodologies, processes used in designing the project? As I said, right now, these tools, methodologies, and processes are not standardized across different projects and even at the country level. So it's important to have a clear understanding of what are these tools and methodologies. And also it's important to understand what are the requirements by the different financial institutions on their minimum requirements in terms of processes, tools, and methodologies to be applied in the project development. And calculating the full and incremental cost of the project is also important, as I mentioned earlier. And is there an interagency or multi-stakeholder coordination mechanism in place for project development and implementation? And finally, which domestic and international financial institution you will be approaching to fund the project, and the types of financial instruments you will be availing. Different institutions have different requirements, different eligibility criteria, different processes, and again, this is a challenge and a barrier in terms of accessing climate finance, but having a thorough understanding of at least the financial institution that you envision to put forward your project proposal will at least help you improve, enhance your accessibility to resources from that particular institution. So I have listed a few of the online resources here from the information with regards to the national adaptation plans, support coming from the GCF for NAP preparation, how do you scope and design an adaptation project, report on the full cost of adaptation, and other compendium of tools and methodologies. And here I've listed the different funds. So the first four, the Adaptation Fund, the Green Climate Fund, the GEF, and the LDC, Special Climate Change Fund. These are funds that are directly under the convention and the Kyoto Protocol in the case of the Adaptation Fund. There is also another dedicated climate fund under the World Bank, which is the Climate Investment Funds. So most developing countries are taking advantage and making use of these resources to fund both adaptation and mitigation projects. And finally, the other windows, funding windows within the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, the national development banks, and in terms of domestic resources, and other bilateral sources from the French Development Fund, the German Development Fund, GI, the German development institutions, British, the US Agency for International Development, USAID, and others. And I'm sure that most of these institutions, your agency would have accessed resources in the past or have existing relationships. In the case of the private sector, in terms of looking at which companies or private sector associations that are engaged for the project, the type of project that you are developing, and in terms of innovative sources of finance, the global market mechanisms linked to the carbon markets, and also innovative sources of finance generated at the domestic level, coming from, for example, levies of fossil fuel or or um, or other sources of public financing, um, and also philanthropic foundations, organizations that are active at the country level. That's it for this session. Thank you for your time.